On this episode of the show, I have with me Michael White. He's co-founder and CEO at Multiply, and we're going to be talking about that path from engineering to CEO. We're going to talk to him about his childhood entrepreneurship bug. Did that affect change? Potentially provide him a different lens to look at as a startup founder and how entrepreneurship is viewed by him. Going to also ask him about how it looks like to take that engineering leadership background and transition along the way into that CEO role, and what are some of those steep parts that he's had to learn along the way, and some other stories and learnings and all those good stuff. Michael, thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, Amir. Great to be here.
Absolutely. Before we start, can you tell us all what you guys do at Multiply?
Yeah, absolutely. So Multiply is an AI native mortgage company. We're here to make homeownership more accessible and affordable, and we do it by pairing an agentic back office with expert mortgage advisors so we can deliver discounted mortgage interest rates as well as personalized service. The other important thing to know is that we work with about 1,100 companies to offer their employees mortgages as a benefit. As part of a comprehensive homeownership benefit program, again, all in service of making homeownership more accessible and affordable.
Absolutely. Very interesting. All right. So this episode, we're going to talk about your path to becoming a CEO, obviously. And you did spend many years within the engineering space, but you shared a story and I thought it was great, and maybe that's a starting point. So you've had that entrepreneurship bug ever since you were a kid, and maybe as we won't go all the way back and talk about the whole chronology, but I think it's a good story. I think it's a good way of kind of shaping what the episode's going to be about.
Yeah, sure. So as a kid, I would turn pretty much anything I could into a business. I sold business cards. I sold things on consignment on eBay. I built websites. But I think probably one of the most fraught with lessons and more maybe exotic businesses that I started was crickets in suburban Atlanta. So I ordered about 1,000 crickets on the internet, and this was probably in it must have been 2000 or so. I was 10 years old-ish. And I figured out that not only could you buy most anything on the internet, you could also have it shipped to your house without your parents knowing. So I had it in my head that I was going to raise crickets. I was going to sell them as bait. I was going to sell what they produce as fertilizer. And all of this would make sense in suburban Atlanta. And, to my parents' credit, when 1,000 crickets arrived in a box, they didn't get mad. They offered to help. We went to PetSmart and got a terrarium, but they did say the crickets have to live outside. And that was probably a good idea.
I'm glad that story turned out well. I was actually just thinking about my childhood, what my parents' reaction would be. I don't know if I would have seen another birthday at this point. I think that's where I would have resigned myself. I think they would have either, I don't know what would happen to me, but that's an amazing story, and I guess the support and the structure there as well. And it's really interesting, as you mentioned that entrepreneurship bug, and you tried to, leverage anything and everything, as that side hustle. And then you obviously go to Stanford. You've been in engineering leadership for a long time. You work for some great companies, Squared, DoorDash. I mean, as you kind of look back at your time in engineering and you look at the fact that you were, that type of kid that, we always hear. I mean, the Gary V side hustle mantra that everyone hears about. When you went into engineering leadership, does that switch just turn off, or does it get refocused? What happens? Because I think a lot of people, when they hear about, side hustles and, you're that type of kid, to translate that into the next steps into a career isn't always what anyone talks about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing that I always gravitated to was solving problems and building things. I like to build websites. I like to, whatever the problem was. For me, engineering was kind of the path to a solution that I just enjoyed the art of problem solving. And so going from an engineer to first an engineering manager and then different sort of forms of engineering leadership never really took me away from that core enjoyment of problem solving. It just sort of changed the mechanisms through which I solve problems. It went from writing code and building features and building systems to building teams and, focusing on higher level architecture questions and technical strategy. And so it's just like kind of a progression of abstractions, but the core was always solving problems.
That's fantastic. And it's interesting because I think that is, I think that gets demonstrated in different ways as people are growing up. For you, as side hustles. For another person, it could be something different. You obviously do move on and start your own business. And, as someone who's in the engineering space for such a long time, to want to become a CEO and take on all the other responsibilities, I guess what was the driver? What made you go, you know what, I've gotten really far. Obviously, you have a lot of skills within engineering leadership, so they are diverse. But to actually take on the CEO title, want to actually also do that in something like insurance, where you're at different companies. Square, obviously, fintech, DoorDash, logistics components there as well. To move into insurance and take on mortgages, and take on the whole thing yourself. What was the driver? What made you make that leap?
Yeah. I mean, I think that what we're talking about is really just a continuum of kind of, I mentioned abstractions before, but it's like, broadening the tools that you're using to solve different problems. So I was at Square for about 9 years. I was an engineer. I was an engineering manager. I led engineering orgs. And sort of with each transition, again, that tool set is broadening. And I just really enjoyed that. Like, I really enjoyed being on the steep part of the learning curve by taking on kind of broader and broader challenges that, I felt like each step, man, I'm totally unqualified for this. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to throw myself into it and I'm going to figure it out. And so starting a company was the combination of, two things. One, that next step of like taking on a new challenge and really like just enjoying being out of my depth. But also it was a desire to solve a set of problems that I had lived through firsthand. And a big part of that is navigating the biggest purchase of your life. So, I've gone through now 2 mortgage processes. And, even in 2026, the median mortgage process involves around 10 people, hundreds of emails back and forth, secure file uploads via Outlook, and more stress and confusion about the process than anyone should have to go through. And I thought that, that's a great application of a lot of the things that I had learned, and a massive, massive problem for the world to solve. Homeownership feels more out of reach today for so many people than I think it has in a long time.
Absolutely. If you were to look at, you mentioned the steep part of the climb to that CEO role, and other things that you have to add to the toolbox. If you were to look at your career in engineering leadership and look at the tangibles, the intangibles, what were some of those things that, as CEO, you look back and go, okay, I had to learn those kind of mid job on the job, and things that you could have maybe tried to establish a little bit sooner in your career? Are there any?
I think looking back at sort of earlier leadership roles, I realized that basically everything I was doing was sales in one form or another. As your scope expands beyond, an engineer implementing a feature or building something on their own, like, you really have to start applying more and more soft skills. You need to effectively collaborate, to manage interdependencies, to influence others, to motivate others. And fundamentally, like, that's kind of what sales is. Sales is matching a solution or an outcome that you want to someone else's need. And so I think that, in one sense, in various engineering leadership roles, I was really applying a sales skill set without really, realizing it. And that became kind of the only thing I do all day, every day, as the CEO at Multiply. So I'd say that's the thing that maybe snuck up on me a little bit. But you can kind of trace back to early leadership roles in a completely different domain.
Absolutely. Is there anything you miss from the engineering days? I mean, I guess, as CEO,
yeah.
Well, you don't get to code as much, but what is it that you left behind that you're like, darn, I do miss some of that?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is just the, rush of like solving a finite problem. I think that now, whether it's, sales or the strategy of the company or critical hires or, whatever it is, there are fewer opportunities for you to take a discrete action or to put effort and energy into something, and then it either works or it doesn't work. Now it's a lot more gray, or it's never ending. But I remember going back to my Square days, I worked on one of the first versions of the Square Stand, which was the first hardware product that Square built after the little white reader. And one of the features that the Square Stand had was you could plug a cash drawer into it. Which is very novel for us at the time. We were the credit card company, and we were going to enable people to accept cash. Today, of course, cash is less common, but it's still a really important thing for small businesses. I remember writing the code to send the command to the cash drawer that made it open in this explosion of kinetic energy. Which is okay, maybe that's overselling it a little bit, but to me, it felt like this rush of whoa, this code that I wrote, on my screen, on my keyboard, made something happen in the real world. And that's a kind of finite rush that I do miss. But at the same time, now I get to have that, sense of fulfillment in sort of a broader sense, because we get to, work with people who are pursuing the dream of homeownership, and we get to support them through maybe it's buying their first home, maybe it's saving meaningful money on a refinance. We get to be a part of that celebration in the real world where they achieve that really massive financial milestone for themselves. And so I think it's a matter of reframing what you get excited about and get satisfaction from.
Absolutely, I love that. And I guess as you're kind of looking at, you do have the technology background, you're a CEO, you mentioned AI trying to modernize some of the components of home ownership, which is hard. I think it's one of the most complicated and terrifying things most people have to go through, because you're signing what feels like hundreds and hundreds of docs, and I don't think anyone actually reads any of it. We're all just going, all right, it's done enough times that it's nothing's slipping by me. And it's weird, because it is a very interesting aspect to life that most don't experience nowadays. It's getting harder. But when you look at that, and obviously the undertone has been solving problems, and you from being a kid, crickets, to the example, at Square, you've been doing all these incredible things now within a different industry. When you look at yourself and you're looking back, you could have potentially been the person that jumped straight from school into a startup and said, "Hey, I'm going to found something." You went the path of building a career and down the engineering leadership path. When you look at that, if you were to have seen this idea potentially right out of school, could you compare and contrast the type of leader you'd be? Because I see a lot of people, the traditional path is to be very, very early career in startups, but I'm also seeing a growing trend of CEOs that have spent some amount of time in industry and in leadership positions before they make that jump.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's one right answer. I think that, for me, something that I really believed, even though I'd spent a lot of my childhood and time growing up trying to turn things into businesses and really having a lot of fun doing it, I knew that to really go and start a startup, and particularly a venture-backed startup, it needed to be a problem that I felt really deeply and personally. I never wanted to start a company just to start a company that. It was more about, having a problem that I could see myself waking up trying to solve every day for the next 10 years, or maybe even for the rest of my life. And so I had a really high bar, and that's a big reason that I didn't try and start a company right out of college. I think that by waiting for me, it gave me both sort of more perspective on how to solve problems, but also like more experience in the world to like find the problem that I wanted to really go after. Most 22-year-olds coming out of college are not thinking about home ownership, or they're thinking about it as a distant future step in their life journey. I think for us, we want to make that more attainable for them, and we want to make it something that they're considering earlier in their life than later. But definitely wasn't on my radar back when I was starting out of college. At the same time, I think it's extremely valuable to have the beginner's mind and to not be weighed down by how legacy or established companies or established industries necessarily do something. And so, one real benefit that I think young founders have is that they can, come in and just be hard charging without feeling the constraints of how things were done before. So, I try and balance that because, I have been in a big successful fintech company before, but it was also one that really went to great lengths to, avoid those exact traps.
Absolutely. I mean, that's fantastic. I think I 100% agree. And it's interesting because I am seeing that experience translate differently. And you said different advantages to coming into the market. To go back to touch on, you mentioned something about agentic. I feel like, there's no episode we can do that doesn't have a talking point about agentic. And when it comes to this industry, and you're talking about agentic and those solutions that are trying to bring about efficiency, talk to us a little bit about where an agent sits. Like what is this agent doing that's going to make it better for us and for as a consumer? An agent obviously has some connotations. Some are really good, some are really bad. This is a scary, big thing. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So maybe to start, it's worth thinking about mortgages as the most complicated financial product that most people will encounter. They have many steps. Some of them are regulatorily mandated. There are a ton of inputs that go into it. And so as a result, there are a lot of people involved in the process. Mortgages are, in engineering terms, they're non-deterministic. There are infinitely many variations on an individual's financial situation, on a home's characteristics, on market dynamics, and in the process of originating the mortgage itself. And so that non-determinism has meant that historically it's pretty tough to automate a lot of the mortgage process. You end up needing a lot of people specializing on each of the different steps and then problem solving the various complexities and issues that can arise. And so you can't just write a 10,000 line if statement to cover all of those variations. What's really powerful about the time that we're living in now is that AI gives us a probabilistic tool set. And so it's kind of perfectly matched to the non-determinism and the complexity that home financing involves. So that enables what we're doing at Multiply. So we are building a modern mortgage experience that can be seamless and more efficient, meaning lower costs and lower rates for home buyers. And so to your question about where the agentic approach fits in that lifestyle, let me tell you where it doesn't fit. One thing that we believe very strongly is that this is a complicated transaction. It's stressful. It's something that people don't encounter very often. It is incredibly helpful to have an expert in your corner, to have a person who does this all day, every day that you can call and you can text. And so we have a whole team of mortgage advisors who are your first point of contact and are there to provide very personalized white glove service. Where we apply AI is in the back office. So it's all those, 10 people who are involved from, everything from pre-approval all the way through to funding. where, at a typical company, they're like applying a lot of judgment, a lot of project management. This is a perfect application for AI. And just two quick examples. One, we have a great product called Rate IQ, where you give us a competing offer from another lender. They give you a PDF of a quote. You upload it. We will extract all the terms out of that quote, not just the rate, not just the APR, but the various costs that a lot of people don't really fully consider or understand when evaluating a mortgage offer. And we will price that apples to apples with our network of lenders that we work with. And at a minimum, we'll tell you if you're getting a good deal or not. But in a lot of cases, we find that we're able to offer a better rate and then great quality of service all the way through the process using Rate IQ without any effort from the individual. They just upload a PDF and AI does the rest. The other thing I'll mention is we have an agentic mortgage processing agent called Loan Sentinel. And what it does is it analyzes all the different components of the transaction continuously throughout the transaction. It looks for red flags. It looks for things that could, cause issues. It tries to predict what underwriting is going to require in order to get the loan over the finish line. And it can help problem solve those early in the process when they're easy to resolve rather than later when they could put the close timeline at risk. And so those are a couple examples of how we're applying AI to make the process more efficient, lower cost, and generally less stressful for home buyers going through this really complicated transaction.
I love it. It's interesting because I think the more people I speak to and more parts of the process that are being examined to bring about that efficiency, and then you start thinking about how inefficient the whole process is. And we're not even talking about the whole process. We're talking about parts of it. So it's an amazing opportunity because I guess as we're talking about AI and the opportunity ahead of us, there's this conversation of young, nimble startups that have advantages in certain ways, and then older legacy companies that have advantages in certain ways. I think I mentioned this maybe 5-6 years ago when I was talking about AI. It's like I feel like there's a race, and people may not tangibly hear or talk about that race, but I feel there is a race because it is a company that is moving more nimbly with less data versus a company that has a lot of that data, but it's really harder to action on it. And it's definitely interesting to watch. I got to be honest with you. I mean, there's certainly some advantages of being nimble and fast.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to action on the data, but it's also hard to change sort of organizational inertia. You think about a lender that has, 10,000 people in operations. That is a really large organization. They've been doing things the same way for a long time. They've adopted technology gradually, and any kind of change at that scale is a massive project. And so, you'll see these big traditional lenders spending hundreds of millions of dollars and many years on AI transformation. And I think it's really important and it will be very beneficial for them. But at the same time, our bet is that we can build from scratch a new kind of mortgage company faster than an established company can retrofit their existing massive organization and workflows.
Absolutely. Love it. Michael, we could probably spend a whole another episode talking about just the inner workings of the processes that are being looked at and opportunities there, but we'll table that for maybe a future episode. If somebody does want to learn more about Multiply, or if they have a follow-up question for you, what are good ways of connecting?
Yeah, so you can find us at multiplymortgage.com. We would love to support any of the listeners here in their home buying journey. We also work with employers, so your employer might offer us. Ask your HR team about us. And then if you'd like to get in touch with me, I'm on LinkedIn, pretty prolific. You can find me MW White on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Thank you for taking the time and joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks, Amir.
Absolutely. All right, that's it for this episode. Be back again. Different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, Michael walked us through his path from selling crickets to being a CEO and everything in between, and some of the learning curves and some of the things that he's had to learn and adjust and apply those learnings, and a lot of tangible stuff he's been able to carry through, and learned a little bit about agentic within the industry as well. And I think it's a fantastic episode. You could share it with somebody else that could also benefit from it. I'd really appreciate that. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.